Welcome to This is Concrete, a podcast where we speak with the people whose work revolves around concrete and coatings. Let's get to what you came for.
Hello, Chad Gill here. I'm the host of the This is Concrete podcast, where I talk with leaders in facility management, architecture, contracting, and more. This episode is brought to you by Concrete. Concrete is a concrete polishing and coatings company with nearly 20 years of experience working in commercial, industrial, and residential markets. So whether you need smooth transitions for your warehouse traffic, a show-stopping lobby floor, or a seamless concrete accent wall, we can provide the skill and imagination you need to make your concrete uncommon. So what are you waiting for? Visit us on thisisconcrete.com to learn more about Concrete today. So joining me today is Jesse Long, who began doing residential work in 2004 with Procon, and he's in the Rocky Mount area. They now employ nearly 400 employees and perform all types of commercial and industrial concrete projects. So Jesse's experience is in fleet and tool management. I've got experience in that same thing, but not in a good way, as well as working with Procon's flat work finishing group. And he's also filled roles in project management and as a general superintendent as well. So Jesse, thanks for coming on. Excited to hear about kind of how you're keeping up with all of your stuff, man.
Sounds good. I'm excited to be here.
So my experience with fleet, tool and equipment management is, where is it? What happened to it? Where does dent come from? What do you mean it doesn't work? We're supposed to change the oil in this? Those kind of things. Always followed by the ever scary term of "we fix." That's normally a bad sign. So how did you get into this aspect of the business?
I started fairly small. The company, we had a fairly small fleet when I started, and I just kind of come into it by default a little bit. I'm working with our finish group. That's the area of the company where we own the most assets. We rent a lot of our other equipment on the job sites, skid steers and excavators and that kind of thing. So we got started in that, and what first got us started is our fleet of vehicles on fleet management. We have approximately 80 vehicles on the road, and so safety was a big concern as our fleet grew. So we, several years ago, started using GPS on vehicles to maintain our service intervals and keep up with our registrations and state inspections and all of that kind of thing. And then over the years, we've started using it more and more. We actually switched platforms a couple of years ago because we wanted to add dash cams from a liability standpoint.
Really?
And yeah, it seems like that has been a big help.
So how does that tie to safety? I mean, keeping your vehicles in good working order, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, tires blow out, people crash, things like that would be bad. But how did you tie it into your safety program to drive the GPS portion of it?
Well, what we had, before we had the GPS, we would get calls or we would have incidents, and typically the company is at fault unless you have some proof otherwise. So that was one thing that drove us to it. And then the other thing is we wanted a safe fleet. And so having the GPS allows us to monitor speed. The system we now use, it gives us a driver safety scorecard, and it monitors a lot of different things. It monitors braking rate, acceleration rate, harsh braking events, that type of thing. There's even rolling stop monitoring and things like that. So what we found, first thing we found is having the system don't really do you any good unless you have someone paying attention to it, keeping the information correct, and monitoring the reports as they come out.
I would think that, tracking it might work well for a couple of days, but if they figure out nobody's looking, then, you lose all the value. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. I hadn't thought about that, the safety scorecard. Do you find that you get a couple of drivers like, hey, we're going to work on this, man?
Yeah, we have. Actually, in the last several months, in the past, we haven't spent a lot of time looking at the safety portion of it. We primarily used it for maintenance tracking and that kind of thing. In the last several months, we had some incidents where we hit deer, had deer damage and that type of thing. And so we started looking at it a little bit more, and we found that somehow we hit a lot more deer when we're traveling at excessive speeds. So
Yeah, you must have only hitting a quick deer.
that's right. Yeah, that's what it was. So
Slow deer weren't on the road.
That's right. But what was interesting about it is our fleet across 2 states primarily, we run. Our drivers would typically run with traffic or whatever they were doing. So once we started looking at it, we were running fast quite a bit. But how it helped us within about a 3-week time period of just gentle reminders that, hey guys, we're exceeding the speed limit by more than a reasonable amount. We set some guidelines in there that we don't expect you to be. We don't have a zero tolerance policy, but we want folks to be reasonable. And so what we found was after about 3 weeks of fairly constant reminder of every week, we went to having a significant amount of reported incidents through the GPS system to where now we're only at a couple a week. So we probably went from 30 over speeding incidents in a week to 2 or 3 now. And so it just seems like it gives us a lot better feel for what's going on.
So besides being safer and that kind of thing, does that translate to a difference when you show that to like your insurance agent and stuff like that?
We have not seen any specific issue or savings on that front. But what we found is it does lead to a safer fleet and fewer incidents, which in turn that makes the insurance companies happy.
Well, yeah, fewer deer you hit, the less it costs too, I'm sure.
That's right. Yeah.
I mean, without that.
So it's been a big help on that front.
And that tracks your maintenance, so you get when to rotate tires or change oil or any number of like regular maintenance things. So you have a fleet manager, or is that what you do? You monitor those so you know when you need to get them serviced?
Yeah, we actually have a fleet manager that handles that he reviews it daily, and we've got it set up where he gets a report anytime there's overdue service required or upcoming service. And so that makes it much easier. It gives us time to plan. In a lot of instances, it gives us time to swap out vehicles and get a vehicle back to our shop and perform maintenance in-house, which in turn saves cost. If we're waiting until it's actually due and then taking it to the closest dealer that we can find, that's not your most reasonable route.
Sure.
So that portion has been very helpful. We can see what's coming up in the next week, what's within 500 miles of needing a service, and that type of thing. And
what do you do?
It's been very helpful.
So that's with your vehicles, like, and some of that I'm sure translates over into equipment. But when you're tracking your equipment or your heavier tools and that kind of thing, how does it work out in there?
That's something that's fairly new for us. The system we use is recently they added a new device that is a powered asset tracker. So we use 2 different types. We have a lot of connexes that we use to store tools and equipment on job sites. And those obviously don't have a power source. So we use an unpowered tracker. It's a battery powered device. And that one doesn't give you a lot of information except for location. It alerts you when it moves, and then it allows us to see how long it was on a job site, which in turn lets us bill the equipment to that job site for however long it was sitting there. And so we've done that for about a year, and that's been very helpful. Just keeping an eye on where our tool connexes are and being able to bill them accurately. Before we had the system, we were guessing at it a little bit, and we were doing it more by the month. But now we're able to dial in, and we typically do it by the week now. And so it just gets a more accurate cost reporting because we can run it. We could fine tune it to the day if we wanted to, but we don't normally move them that often. So we stick with the weekly billing.
Is that important because of how you're billing your customer or client, or is it also that goes into how you're budgeting and estimating your next jobs?
Yes, I mean primarily it's less about billing the client, but more about getting our cost allocated correctly in-house. So we're billing for all of our overhead expense. We're able to capture that correctly.
So how do you handle, does that come into play? Like when you guys get into like let's say you're doing a T&M job, and you're in one of these contracts where you're only allowed to have 10% overhead and profit. If you can bill it out and you can say my equipment's there for this period of time, you can put that into direct cost as opposed to having to somehow get that out of the overhead and profit number, right?
That's right. Yes. Yeah. Because we can show exactly what equipment we have there. And so that's one thing that we've just recently started doing more of is now that they have the powered asset trackers, we're installing them on all of our equipment that has power, our ride-on trowel machines, our soft cut saws, that kind of thing. And so again, it gets our costs more accurate and also allows us to know where everything is. Those tools and equipment, it's not unheard of to leave one on a job overnight because it's late night and we don't have a forklift to load it up or something like that. And there's been times we've lost them for a few days.
Yeah, I think I rented an air filter from Sunbelt for a year and a half one time on a 2-week job.
That sounds about right. Yep.
It's the most expensive air filter I've ever even been affiliated with. Yeah, it's just they were good about it. They ended up helping us out a lot, so that was fine. But yeah, I mean, being able to avoid that. How small, how small a piece of equipment do you track?
Normally, if it has a battery, and so a lot of your walk behind trowel machines and smaller manual start saws and that kind of thing, we don't track it. But basically, right now, that's our threshold. Is if it has a battery, typically that means we can easily track it. And the battery is important because it allows us to, you tie the unit to the key switch. That will track your engine hours, which helps us track services and maintenance intervals. If it doesn't have the key switch, if it doesn't have power, it gives you the location, but not really the other information.
Yeah, I would think that's a good way to handle it. And then how do you, let's say you're dropping off 4 ride-on trials on a job and they're going to be there for a few days. How do you tell the system, hey man, they're here, and then they're gone? Or do you just have it geo-fenced and it knows that's where the job's at, so it must be on that job, or what?
Yeah, so what we do when we have a new job start, we add a geofence and we encompass the perimeter of the job site. So anytime a vehicle or equipment moves in and out of that geofence, it pings that's where it is. It's on that job. Allows us to track it much better.
And then so you can run a report that says, hey, I had this equipment show me all the equipment on this job. Anytime it'll show you not only the equipment that was there, but the number of hours or days or weeks it was on that job.
That's I don't have a good answer for you yet on that. That's something that that report's new enough to us. I don't know what all functionality it has.
But that's where you want to get to, I guess, is being able to see
exactly.
Yeah,
and I'm sure it's there. We just haven't. I don't have the experience with it yet to give you a good picture of how that looks. But there's definitely a utilization report that will tell you where the machine was and how many hours it was used on any given day.
And I would say it would tell you if you'd be interested, like, hey, it's 3:00 in the morning and it's leaving the job site, but you're a concrete guy. You guys start jobs at 3 a.m. It's like, for me, if that thing's moving after 7 p.m., man, I got a big problem. I'd really go get that thing for somebody's house. But
that's right.
But yeah, so what other stuff do you find that's how else do you track, like how do you guys keep track of hand tools and like the small tools, no batteries and stuff like that? But these are the things that get lost, or I don't know how many times we get somewhere and we don't have it, so now we're looking for it and it's cheaper to go buy another one, so you end up with 1,000 mop buckets, or 1,000 might be heavy, 900 mop buckets. But because you're buying one every job because you don't have it there, like how do you, or they disappear, those kind of things, and it's not always theft. Sometimes it's just lost. It's left behind, those kind of things. Do you guys do a tool checkout sheet or anything?
Well, so we have we're always looking for better options, obviously. But maybe 5 years ago, we started our Connex process. So we have about 35 20-foot Connexes, sea shipping containers.
Oh yeah.
And so we bring those in at the shop. We inventory them. We have a standard inventory list that goes in every Connex because most of our work, it requires the same tools generally. Once in a while, there's a specialty item, but for the most part, standard tools. So what we do is we inventory it at the shop. We get a full list, and then when the job starts, we take that Connex to that job site and assign it to the crew on site. And we have a little handoff meeting. We take about 10 minutes. We go through, we verify all the tools are there, they work, and the superintendent of that job site signs for it. That these are my tools that are on my job site. And then
what happens if so at the end of the job, the inventory and some stuff was not there? What's the process for that?
Right now, our process is it gets replaced, and we bill all that to that job site. So our superintendent, he's responsible for that particular job, and so anything additional that gets billed to that job, that job site, that budget has to cover. So he's incentivized to not lose tools. The other thing that we have set up is if something gets damaged or quits working throughout the job, if we replace the tool, that's a normal cost of doing business expense, if you will. That job site's not, it's not penalized for it unless it's like a generator that gets ran over with a forklift or, something like that.
A generator that's run over by a forklift. Seems like a rather specific example you got there, Jesse.
That's happened once or twice or 3 times, but yeah.
Or just random things like a lift gate goes through a passenger vehicle. We've had that every now and then. So when you're talking about charging to the job, though, you're not talking about charging to the customer always. You're talking about internal accounting of this is what we're using here, and then what happens external from there. That's a different application. Certainly information that passes, but it's almost like you're almost renting the tools to yourself, and it sounds almost like you're running a rental company in-house.
Basically, we do. Now a lot of companies are set up where they have their direct costs, and it's a fairly low, and their overhead's a fairly high number. We try to get as much stuff billed directly to the job as we can, so our direct cost is higher, but our overhead is lower, as a general rule. So essentially, that's what we're doing. Is we're buying tools and then we're renting them out to job sites. And so if we don't get it billed properly to the job site, it looks like we're spending a bunch of money on tools that we never use.
Yeah.
It's essentially what happens.
Now, you said you do actually rent a lot of your large equipment, like bobcats and excavators and things like that. I was surprised by that. Is there a reasoning behind it? Like, how do you know what to buy and what to rent?
So normally what we buy is specialty items. We several years ago, we owned more equipment, but our footprint got larger. Our downtime was significant if we had a piece of equipment break down. The time we would, a lot of our jobs are 2 to 4 hours from our shop. So until we could get a mechanic there, you would burn a day of having your equipment down, minimum. Whereas with rental companies, they have locations everywhere. If you have a piece of equipment break down within 2 hours, they can have you a new one and you're rolling again. So that's our biggest reason, our standard equipment that we rent it, but specialty stuff, we have laser screeds and trial machines and all of that stuff. And then we have some grading equipment that has guidance, elevation guidance that's not readily available from rental companies. And so we purchase that stuff.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's one of those things like when you're in a business and you're looking at it, you're like, well, clearly I'll buy it, then I'll own it. But the cost of ownership can be quite a bit higher than renting it, the 5 or 6 times you may need it, or especially if you're using it sparingly. Now, do you guys do a checkout as well? Like when I guess like you're saying with the Connex, because you're not just checking that it's here, but you're checking condition and is it ready to go back out in the field and those kinds of things as well. And that's, again, part of what the superintendent is incentivized to do, to take care of that equipment, because that repair, I assume, would go against it as well, or against that project or job.
Yes. Yeah, typically. If it's normal wear and tear, hammer drill is not going to last for so many years. So if it quits working.
You're getting years out of a hammer drill? What? We're going to have another episode on your brand of hammer drill.
That's well, if we can, typically what we found is we either lose it or break it before it wears out.
Yeah.
So we've just been trying to put some more focus on keeping up with it a little bit better. And so that's why I would say if it wears out, we'll essentially replace it to that job for no cost to the job. But if you break it or you lose it, you get to buy it.
Yeah, and that's not as much fun when you're buying a broken tool.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you get a good deal on it. But yeah, it's gonna be good. So yeah, I think that sounds like some really good accounting type of applications. I mean, but also just the logistics of it. And a lot of times when I talk to people about tracking equipment and material, or equipment and materials, a lot of times one of the answers say it's not worth it. Have you guys found that it's really saved enough money to make? I mean, this isn't a system that's running itself. So I mean, it's paying off for you to follow this that closely?
It is on our tools. We've ran some numbers. We can pay 2 people's salary a year to keep up with keeping our tools and the amount of replacement that we have done. Before we started the system, we had trailers that were very easy to move, and there was really nobody to spot check and routinely say, hey, this is what's supposed to be here and here's what's actually here. And so it seemed like it was a pretty normal occurrence that we would do a 3 or 4 month job, and we would pretty much buy all the tools we needed for that job on that job. We would actually go to the store, purchase what we needed, and we had no idea where they went. And so with more employees and getting bigger, and the amount of tools we needed, that cost just kept rising. And now, I mean, I'm not saying we don't buy tools anymore. We still buy plenty.
Sure.
But the percentage is, I'd say it's half.
Wow.
As far as what we actually purchase. I mean, we retain it a lot better. And it's even in the last couple of years of getting these Connexes, we deliver them, we spot check them. And then when it's done, we do a final inventory. But we're trying to even get a little bit better and, every month or bi-monthly do an inventory and just keeping some focus on it. It seems like overall, if there's some level of accountability there, it's much more likely that they're there. I don't know where they go otherwise, but and a lot of times what we found, they just end up in the mud because folks are, as a general rule, I think they're not as worried about it. If they know nobody's going to be asking where it's at, they're not going to pay as much attention to it.
Well, yeah, especially when you're coming, if your culture before was, we're going to buy a lot of tools at every job. Well, this is fine. This is just one of the ones we buy.
Yeah.
It does get pervasive that way too. No, yeah, that's so I'm curious why the Connex as opposed to the trailer. I would think a Connex is harder to move around, but is that intentional?
Well, it's somewhat intentional. Security is another thing that we've had. Unfortunately, we found out 3 or 4 different times that all it takes to get into a normal tool trailer is a pair of 10 snips. You can buy the best lock in the world, but you can punch a hole in the side of it very easily.
It's not the door, it's the wall.
That's right.
Yeah, people.
Yeah.
That's I've seen a demonstration on that where the guy was saying this door is fantastic. You can not break into this house no matter what you do. And the guy just went through the vinyl siding and then through the sheetrock. It's an easier way to get in.
That's right.
So yeah, to know a Connex. Do you guys end up moving Connex around just on like a rollback or something like that from each job?
Yeah, we actually we found a gooseneck trailer that was designed specifically for that. It's one reason we stick with the 20 footers because we can move it with a standard pickup with a gooseneck hitch. And the trailer, it's designed for the Connexes, and it doesn't have a floor. It's just got rails up the side and a winch. So we just back up to it. It tilts up like a rollback, and you slide it up on with the winch. It takes about 4 minutes, and when you get to the job site, you tip it back up and release the winch, and it slides right off, and off you go.
Man, I've had a fleet of trailers, man, and I'm telling you, we went to box trucks just because it was harder to justify dragging a box truck over a curb, an island, a fire hydrant, a stop sign, all the many things that people that are not used to driving trailers hit. But yeah, that Connex, man, that's a pretty rugged box, and like you said, pretty secure too. And it's a stationary item too. I mean, people see your Connex, I'm sure they're branded and labeled and stuff too, so that helps on the job. You look substantial for sure. I mean,
it really helps a lot from that aspect. It just gives it a nice look, and it's a good base of operation on the job site. But it also looks good for the customers and people driving by. They see instead of stuff scattered everywhere, they see a nicely painted Connex with a logo that's about the size of a billboard on it. So it works out nice.
Yeah, that does work out pretty good. And yeah, I mean, it could be a mess on the inside, but from outside it looks great. But it sounds like it's pretty good on the inside too. That's pretty great, man. Well, man, that's so. What's the system you're using now?
The GPS system we're using is called Somero.
Somero, okay.
Yeah, it's geared towards the trucking industry. There's a lot of things that you can do with it. We're getting ready to find out in that regard, because a lot of the trucks that a lot of construction companies use, including us, are required to run DOT numbers and that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, digital log books and stuff like that.
Yeah, and so it has all that capability. You can do mileage reports by state and digital logbooks if you so choose, and all of those options.
Yeah, the joy of owning trucks. Yeah, running them up and down the road. But no, that's awesome, man. Jesse, I appreciate it, man. This has been great. Obviously, I'm gonna be logging on to Somero now and looking for all of my tools.
There you go.
But yeah, I'm like, man. I mean, you'd think when you own a 1,600-pound grinder, it's less likely to disappear, but it can happen. So yeah, this is a good way to do it. I'm gonna have to figure out where we would put, what we can track. But kind of, I like your characteristic of it. It's like whatever you got a battery on, because that's probably the limitations of it. I mean, is it expensive? I mean, you don't have to be specific, but is it an expensive system? But I mean, I guess it doesn't matter as long as you're getting the ROI out of it that you're getting.
Yeah, it depends on what tractors you're using. They're anywhere from $10 to $35 a month, depending on what all sensors that you get and that kind of thing. Right. And you could probably spend more than that, but that's just what we use. And that, like the higher end of that would be the vehicle trackers with the dash cameras and that kind of thing. The lower end is the basic equipment trackers.
I know one of our systems, the one that we're using, you're getting. It goes in that OBDI port or whatever, and you're getting, if you get a check engine light and some other issues out of that too. I mean, it tracks a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, it does.
Man, that's awesome. Well, Jesse, man, I really appreciate you coming on and talking to us about it. And we'll definitely put a link to your website and probably the Somero as well, just so people can kind of see what we're talking about. I think that makes sense. And I'm sure they'll have some dashboards and whatnot. And I guess I'm probably going to jump off of here and go talk to my warehouse guy and say, hey, man, I might have a solution. Normally he knows that means it's bad for him, but it may be good in the long run.
That's right.
Yeah, nothing's more dangerous around here than when Chad has an idea.
That's right. Yeah.
Especially when I'm like, hey, man, I'm telling you, man, Procor's using it, man. I think it's a good idea. So we'll see where it goes. Man, thanks a lot, Jay.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, man. Talk to you soon.
Okay. Take care.
Thanks for listening to This is Concrete. We look forward to you joining us next time. Be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.